Democracy is the worst form of government except those other forms who have been tried from time to time. Winston Churchill. When I did my last-minute research on the subject of democracy, I came across some interesting arguments against it, as well as for it. In order to make some sense of this thing, I decided it'd be best to write down what I've gathered so far. There's no sugarcoating it, people are stupid. The majority of people aren't exactly rocket scientists and inventors, the majority is well below what we'd call very intelligent. Don't get me wrong, I don't claim to be above average myself. I just think about this stuff quite a lot. And I love to learn and do my own research. The basic idea of a democratic system is that like a free market, it'd be a self-correcting organism, where people vote what's best for their nations, and if they vote to the wrong direction, they can correct their mistakes in the next elections, and so forth. The problem with this idea lies here: there's no collective good that everyone are voting for. People in general only care about themselves, and vote for their own good, which is usually at direct odds with the common good, or that which would be good for the whole society. So, not only are people in general rather dumb, they're also quite self-centered. I'm not even saying that it's a bad thing to vote for what's best for you. It's a perfectly natural thing. Self-preservation remains to be the highest law of mankind. So, there's a whole market of competing odds at display in democracy. The whole idea of how in democracy, people control the government, is false, when you think about it. From a flock of 100 people, only 50 plus 1 decide what to do, and the voices of the rest are left unheard, or cared about. This also isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just how it works. What we currently have in Finland, for example, isn't just a democratic system. It's not like we can vote against or for every single legislation or policy in separation. No, what we have is called an electoral democracy, in which the people only vote for representatives, who then start swinging with policies and legislations. If the representative decides to change course after the elections, there's only so much that the people can do about it, and the worst part is, the average voter doesn't really even care at that point. People in Finland usually only pay any attention to politics near the elections, and after they've casted their votes, they simply sit back and continue watching TV. It's like their responsibility towards their country is completed by writing a name on the paper. They've done their part, and now we'll just wait for the magic to happen. This obviously hasn't worked out very well, ever. Another notion that I want to make is this: if Finland continues to live within the authoritarian regime that is the European Union, it'd be a child's dying wish to call it a truly democratic system, since our legislations come directly from the EU. If we don't cooperate, we'll be punished, and the worst part? Those bureaucrats in the EU aren't elected. When Jeremy Corbyn voted against the Maastricht Treaty in 1993, he declared it was because the EU had handed control to an unelected set of bankers. So, in my opinion, if we're to call the EU a democratic system, which it's not, we should at the very least be able to choose our own representatives, and not have them appointed by people who don't have a damn clue about our country or what the normal people want. So, in Finland, the name of the game is electoral democracy, or representative democracy, where we appoint our own representatives to take care of our personal and national interests, while in the US, for example, they have what we call constitutional democracy, where the powers of the majority are exercised within the framework of a representative democracy, but the constitution limits the majority and protects the minority, usually through the enjoyment by all of certain individual rights. For example, freedom of speech, or freedom of association. Source: Wikipedia. We don't have a constitution in Finland, not like the USA has. We also don't have freedom of speech or freedom of association, but that's a whole another subject. The main problem I personally see in the idea of democracy is, that while we've been given the right to choose our candidates, we're being told what to think since we've gone to government schools. We're being taught the values that make us vote in certain ways on certain issues, and so on. You know, the government is teaching your kid approximately 10,000 or so hours when they're minors, at the age where they form their own views of the world, or are supposed to, at least. What kind of policies do you think that the government schools would promote? I'd guess, not exactly making the government smaller. That'd be insane. considering they're all working for the government, and that could possibly make them lose their jobs. Do you think that the government would like it, if we were to want more businesses and more jobs to the private sector, instead of the government-run public sector? I'd guess not. That's less money and less power for the government. In short, I don't think the government actually would like to get smaller. An important notion: government doesn't have any money. Read that again. The government doesn't have any money. The government only gets money from you, from the taxpayers, or by taking loans, which always makes life worse for the future generations, who have to pay those loans back, or then they simply print out more money, which leads to inflation, which always hits the poor hardest. They have just a tiny amount of money now, but they have even less, if the prices go up. That's the way the government works. Keep this in mind every time the Democrats come up with new heart-melting questions like what's wrong with the welfare state? Why do you hate the poor? Don't you want them to have more money from welfare? Why do you want these people to remain poor? Keep those points in mind when debating these people. The government doesn't have any money, so when you're asked, for instance, that do you want the poor to receive plus $200 a month, and why not? What they're really asking is, are you ready to give up your own money in form of rising taxes to give money to the government to transfer it to the poor? I don't remember the exact numbers, but you know, a whole bunch of the money you pay in taxes doesn't go to support the causes the government seemingly supports. Most of it goes to the huge paychecks these bureaucrats receive every month, plus all the benefits they get. When you're asked if you'd wish the poor to get more money, there's nothing to argue about. If you say yes, you're on their side. If you say no, you're simply a bad person, an evil capitalist, who hates the poor from the bottom of your black heart. But instead, if they ask you, would you be okay with raising the taxes, which is essentially the same question, you'd have a chance to have an actual conversation about it. You could argue that instead of people paying more taxes, people could rely on voluntarism more. People wouldn't have to be slaves to the system of welfare, and live like leeches, if they had people from their own communities to help them through the rough times. You could argue that instead of paying more taxes, people could directly give money where they wanted to support a worthy cause. So, in the current system we have, the government has power, but no money, so it takes it from your salary, with force if necessary, and redistributes it the way it wants to. The reason I say the government is power, I'd even say that by nature, a government is a compound of violence, is this. What happens if you refuse to pay your taxes? What happens if you disobey any law? They come and correct you by force. I'm not saying that this isn't necessary on some cases, but taxation, as the libertarians like to say, is most definitely theft. They're taking money that you've earned by force. It's simple. There are many things to say that are negative about democracy, but for simplicity, I'll list those ones here, which made me the most convinced that democracy will not persist in the modern era, not for long. Note that in history, there is not a single example of a system of democracy which didn't end up eating itself alive. Here's the list of the negatives. Irrational voters. This concern raises from the notion that most voters vote without having all the possible facts, without seeing the big picture. Most people vote out of habit, not for the concern of their nation's survival. Some people have argued that while a clearly undemocratic system would be oppressive, the modern version of democracy has simply turned oppression to manipulation, to get people to vote and think they're forming their own opinions. Personally, this is a big concern for me. Are we really seeing the big picture? Are we even aware of it? Political instability. People are more polarized, I hate that word, than ever nowadays, when it comes to politics. We elect our own representatives, but in a moment, there can be a campaign from the media to destroy the reputation of these elected officials, which could lead to their impeachment, for example. The hate of the losing side knows no boundaries, as we've seen with the modern liberal Democrats, and they smear campaigns against the Republicans. Fraudulent elections. This is so self-evident, that I won't even explain it further. Rigged elections have been a thing since the dawn of democracy, and it hasn't stopped since. The concept of democracy as a constant process may be flawed and detrimental to a preferable course of development. People may not know what's best for them, and they may drive a great nation down while trying to search for the answer. So, what do I think of democracy? I'm not fond of it, I have to say. Though, I'm not very fond of the other extreme, a world completely without governments, a world that's purely based on the private sector. This is a huge topic to go through, so may this text serve as an introduction to the subject. I'll be talking about this in the future as well, so if you're interested, stay tuned for more. I'd be more than happy to have a debate about this with anyone willing, so if you want, just hit me up here, on YouTube, or on my Instagram, and we'll talk it through. Let's continue spreading the message of white well-being, and most importantly, let's stay infidel. Finish infidel.